Thank you. And thank you all for being here today. You could be home, in bed, asleep. I suppose maybe the folks on Zoom are still in bed, but instead you are here in the sanctuary, are online awake, or at least partially awake. The waking up process can be hard, literally and figuratively. You know, people joke that for Unitarian Universalists, coffee is a sacrament. And I like to think that theologically that's symbolic of waking up. And what's nice here is that you start a little later, so probably those of you who need to be are well caffeinated, because I think it's something beneficial about getting people to semi-consciousness before we start tossing new ideas for pondering their way. Now, both sleeping and waking up are normal parts of human existence, but we all do it differently. I'm a morning person. Anybody else a morning person? I thought they might all be out of brunch already. My husband is not a morning person. We're all different, but we all like to wake well rested. Being well rested, it seems to me, is the trick to waking gracefully. But some people don't seem to want to wake gracefully or other ways. They don't want to get woke. I do find myself wondering if somehow they are not well rested, and that maybe we could help them with that. But I'll come back to that in a few minutes. For some time, I've been listening to the rhetoric in our culture and wondering what exactly the problem is with being woke. Of course, at one level, it is like the NAACP resolution calls out, that the term has been weaponized. But I bet that some of those who respond to that weaponization sometimes sing Amazing Grace. And with gusto, the words come out. I once was lost and now am found, was blind, but now I see. They sing of the gift, the amazing gift of grace that widens their perspective, gives them greater insight and understanding. And I will pause here to note that one of the insights I have gathered in my greater understanding of life is that some disability activists find the line, was blind but now I see, ableist, implying that a blind person is somehow less than whole and in need of correction, implying that they need to be fixed rather than accepted as they are. Others in the disability community understand it as a metaphor, and I think there's validity on both sides of that. But as I was digging into this, I found some alternative wording. I once was lost and now I'm found, was bound, but now I'm free. I kind of like that. Let me know what you think about it. But for today, I invite your metaphorical interpretation to say that there are many ways that we can move from not knowing to greater understanding. And while I'm on the topic of words, some people really like the word wretch. And it's true to Newton's understanding and original meaning. He was writing about how he used to be, and now he's wretched. Other people prefer not to be so harsh. Perhaps different lived experience. Our Unitarian Universalist hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, has alternative wording. It has wretch or save a soul like me, the soul. Now, some other alternative words that I found have been that saved and set me free. And one I personally like is that saved and strengthened me. But back to our metaphor. The singer says, I went from not knowing to knowing. I went from a narrow perspective to a wider one. And it is clear from context that this is a gift, not a curse. So as I was preparing for today, I considered my own journey. My journey from knowing less to knowing more, from being at times a bit clueless to greater understanding. And I have decided that I am not woke. I am awakening. Not a binary, but a process. I'm not done yet. I'm also aware that no matter how much I go from not knowing to knowing, from a narrow perspective to a wider one, there are some things I will never truly understand. things that from my straight, cisgender, white, often privileged perspective, I will never fully get. I remember one of my first-hand awarenesses of racial justice. I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire, and one day, perhaps around junior high school age, a friend told me that a black family had tried to buy a house in town, and that the seller received a call and a threat. They were told that if they sold the house, it would burn. I was horrified. I told my friend that couldn't be true. Now, this was at the time when the Boston News Channel that we watched was regularly reporting on the challenges of busing being used to integrate the schools there. Some of the abhorrent behavior of some of those white people seemed hard for me to understand. But that was the city, not my little town. But then I cast my mind around my town, and I realized I was not aware of a single black family that lived there. And so maybe I thought my friend's rumor was true. Ouch. As I have attended racial justice trainings over my life and read and, well, just lived, I've collected a series of moments like that. Moments when something, grace, insights, being hit over the head, I have increased my perspective, my knowing, my understanding, and usually I have been grateful. But there have been times when I found it all overwhelming, when I felt exhausted by the challenges, embarrassed at all I had not known, weary of what I still didn't understand, and afraid of making mistakes. The song says, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come." My interpretation may not be exactly what John Newton was thinking of, but I am comforted that I've come so far, and I'm glad. I wouldn't really choose to go back. So why would I imagine that I'll regret any future learning that might come my way? 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Grace is variously understood, but I think of it as unearned blessings, a gift or an opportunity, something I did nothing to deserve but got anyway. Now, I will acknowledge that this can get very tangled up with that understanding of privilege that I mentioned, and there's a lot, probably a whole other sermon there. In fact, in getting this sermon put together, I think I came up with about 6 other sermons, which I have spared you. The question of grace, though, always brings me back to my church history class in seminary. There was plenty at that Christian institution that I, as a non-Christian, just kind of went, wasn't that interesting? But I was really intrigued by the concept prominent in early American religion called means of grace. Anybody come from a tradition that talked about means of grace? I've run into a few people, not as used as often, but it addressed the question of what one should, could, would do if one wanted to receive grace. Since grace was a free gift, you couldn't earn it. Good works wouldn't do the trick. But you could open your heart and mind using means of grace. What exactly was meant by this term varied from tradition to tradition, but it could include things like reading sacred texts, the teachings of the institution, sacraments, rituals. For us today, I think it might also include things like meditation or spiritual practices, and sometimes wisdom comes to us, insight comes to us as we're tending the garden or walking in nature. Participating in these things did not guarantee an experience of grace, but it put one in a responsive and receptive attitude and posture. Said another way, it might help to ensure that you did not overlook a blessing that was coming your way because you were busy with your head down. I suspect that this explanation of means of grace might distress my then seminary professor, but my interpretation had an impact on my life. It crystallized for me that as I live my life, I have the opportunity to put myself in situations in which I have the opportunity to grow and learn and broaden and deepen and expand my awareness of the world and my place in it. Sometimes this was scary. When I chose to move from the Northeast, where I had lived my whole life, I was offered a chance to serve a New Start congregation in Texas that had a contemporary worship style. And I said yes. I was excited and scared. I knew enough to know I didn't know enough. The hymn says, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed." I learned so much that year about Texas culture. Anybody from Texas? No? Okay. Texas culture, different communication styles, bless their hearts, what it's like to live far from family, and not insignificantly how to pronounce the letter R. At the end of that year, I was offered the opportunity to do another interim ministry, this time in Miami, with a congregation that was doing serious diversity work. Was I qualified to do that? Heck no. Did I do it anyway? I sure did. And again, I learned so much. This time about Latino cultures and their diversity, about life in a really big city, and how to roll those R's, I could now say. In both situations, I learned and grew, and I made a lot of blunders along the way. I asked questions, I read, sometimes I screamed into the void, wondered why I had put myself in these situations, and at the end, I never regretted them. Those are just two examples. But I hope they help you think about times in your life when you've been given the opportunity to grow and learn, to broaden and deepen, to expand your awareness of the world and your place in it. We don't have to make an interstate move or change jobs. We might try participating in a training or workshop, reading, volunteering outside our comfort zone, choosing books and movies and podcasts that are outside of our normal sphere, shopping in a neighborhood different from your own, even that. I'll offer one more example from my own life, this one pre-seminary and my own little interpretation of means of grace. When I was still working as a software engineer, I had an office mate who was a lesbian. I was theoretically open-minded in this area, but I had not really been tested. Just getting to know Susan as a person would have been enough. But wait, there's more. One day, Susan and a gay coworker came into our office and closed the door. They wanted to talk to me. There was a controversy at the high school in the town where I lived. It involved sex ed and LGBT plus acceptance. It had broken out into a community fight, and a public hearing was coming up. My coworkers didn't live in that town and had no standing to speak. But I did, and I had children in the school system. They needed me to go speak at that meeting, hearings. Me? Inside, I was horrified. That was not a thing I did. Outside, I looked at their faces that clearly expected that once I understood the situation, I would of course agree. And so I said, of course. And I did speak at the hearing, and I didn't die. Now, I have lost track by now of the number of hearings I have spoken at, the rallies and pride marches I have attended, the same-sex weddings that I have officiated. And maybe I would have gotten there anyway, but it always seemed like a little grace that Susan and Paul nudged me along the way. Do you have people who have nudged you along the way? Earlier, I suggested that we all like to wake well-rested. Being well-rested, ready to wake, contributes to waking gracefully. Sometimes, opportunities to expand our horizons come upon us when we are not at our best, and we want to go back to sleep. And sometimes we do. And maybe we circle back after that sweet 15-minute doze after we've hit the alarm snooze button a few times. But what about those people Those people who don't want to wake gracefully or otherwise. They don't want to get woke. Well, here's one option. We can flip the lights on, bang the pots and pans, scream, and shame. And sometimes we will. Some people might have done that yesterday. But I don't think that those people will wake up well. I think they may stay cranky for a long time if we wake them up that way. But we do need to wake them up because unity means all of us. So maybe there's another approach. Maybe we can speak gracefully, with love at the center, surrounded by our values. Maybe we can place a warm cup of coffee or tea next to the bed and let them know that a delicious breakfast is waiting. Maybe over breakfast we don't dwell on the fact that they overslept. No shame, no judgment. Instead, we speak of the wonderful things that the day has in store. Perhaps as we receive gifts of grace, we share them with grace. We remember that we too have made a journey, and we too will journey on. Maya Angelou is credited with saying, "Do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better." My process of awakening continues. The last line of the song, last verse, of the song in our hymnal was not in the original text by John Newton. But it was an early edition. I didn't like it at first. I'm a humanist. I wasn't sure about this praising God for 10,000 years thing. I didn't like it, but then it changed one word. So the original is, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. But then, as I often do, I changed one word, and I now render the word God as love. And it's made all the difference for me. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing love's praise than when we first begun. May we each, in the way that is right for us, keep looking for ways to grow, opportunities to understand, and occasions to include. They are around us always. If only we will open our minds and our hearts, if only we will put love at the center today, tomorrow, and always. May it be so. And let's sing. We're going to wake our senses now.